I managed to average straight high distinctions for my Masters of Business Administration, one of the world's most desired business degrees. I got to learn so many new things working with startups, developing strategies for million-dollar companies, and learning from billion-dollar directors. But doing an MBA can cost you a lot of money and years of your life, so I'm going to share everything I learned. From how to get people lining up to buy from you, how to consistently beat the competition, all the way to how to manage finances like a CFO. So let's start with how to develop a billion-dollar product. See, most companies never make money because the products they develop fail. So then how do companies like Apple consistently make billion-dollar product after billion-dollar product? Well, according to research at INSEAD, it's done through a process called value pioneering, a process which only 14% of companies use, yet lets them capture the majority of profits. And to explain this, there's no better example than Apple's iPod, which dominated 50% of the market despite being 3 years late and without inventing anything new. See, the first thing we need when developing a product isn't a new idea or new technology. Instead, we need a way of reliably predicting if what we're building is going to sell. And this starts by speaking to the only people who decide if your product is good or not, and that's your customers.
You've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. You can't start with the technology and try to figure out where you're going to try to sell it.
Because as Apple's competitors found out the hard way, there's no point having new tech or ideas if people don't want to buy them. So the first thing to do is survey your customers and develop a list of 3 to 5 customer purchasing criteria. These are the key things your customers say are most important to them. So for Apple, they found that customers wanted a device that was portable, carried a lot of songs, was easy to use, and looked good. It sounds simple, but this lets you work out what's called your key success factors, which are the actual product features that will satisfy the customer's purchasing criteria. So for Apple, this was the dimensions of the device, the storage size, number of button presses to pick a song, and the design. This knowledge now gives you the ability to reverse engineer the perfect product. But before we do that, it also lets you do step number 3, which is to learn from the competition and avoid their mistakes. Based on the key success factors, Apple could see their competitors' devices were either small enough but without enough storage, or too big due to having too much storage and being crammed with unnecessary features like radio. They also saw they provided a bad user experience. They were making people press buttons hundreds of times to pick a song, and they saw their MP3 players felt cheap and ugly. All of this set Apple up to pioneer value, which involves 2 steps. Firstly, Apple removed any unnecessary product features like radio to make the iPod smaller. Secondly, Apple then combined features from existing products that were the best at meeting each key success factor. They sourced a smaller hard drive with the same capacity to store lots of songs whilst keeping the iPod pocket-sized. They took inspiration from an award-winning telephone and made choosing songs easier with a click wheel. And they based the design on an old radio which gained popularity for its simple design. Because Apple got rid of any distractions and combined the best solutions, they were the best at meeting every success factor, making the iPod dominate the competition, all whilst having access to the same technology. So the formula for a dominating product is simple. Instead of coming up with new ideas, start by getting a deep understanding of your customers' needs. Then determine the product features customers care about. Then create more value by getting rid of features they don't care about. And then combine existing solutions that are the best at meeting those key success factors. So now you have an amazing product, but good products alone aren't enough to set yourself apart, since products can be copied or reverse engineered. I mean, look at the number of companies who've tried to copy Google. So then how do companies like Google stay ahead of the competition? Well, this is where the art of business strategy comes in, and it's done by answering 2 simple questions. Which markets will we have the biggest advantage and be most profitable in? And how do we compete in those markets to beat the competition and take most of the profits? So first, how can we compete in a market to take most of the profits? Well, according to the father of modern business strategy, Michael Porter, there are 2 ways to do this. The first is where you steal customers from the competition and force competitors out by lowering your prices to levels the competition can't compete with. This is achieved by finding ways to lower your cost of production, allowing you to make more profit per sale and sustain lower prices than your competitors. But the magic then happens when you reinvest these extra profits to further improve your production costs, further lower your prices, and win even more business, which allows you to do it again and again until no one else can compete. This strategy is known as cost leadership, and it's used by giants like Amazon.
And so our approach gives us significant cost structure advantages that lets us have even lower prices.
But the thing to note about this strategy is that you'll need to design all your business activities on lowering costs, all the way from production to the delivery of your product, or else you won't stay competitive. Look at IKEA, for example. They lower their staff costs by having self-assembled products and a self-service experience. They lower their production costs by designing interchangeable components, and they lower their storage and transport costs with their flat pack designs. Everything they do allows them to lower their costs so they can attract more customers. But when should you use the cost leadership strategy? Well, there are two main conditions. The first is when your product is very similar to what the competition is selling, meaning your customers are making buying decisions based on who has the lowest price. The second condition is if you can sell large volumes of product. This is because of something called economies of scale. See, every business has fixed costs which don't increase with the amount of product produced, like equipment, rent, and insurances. And so when you sell more product, you end up lowering your overall average cost per product, allowing you to sell your products cheaper. That's why you mainly see big corporations selling cheaper goods. Now, if cost leadership doesn't sound like your cup of tea, we have our second type of strategy, which is where you align your business activities to become the best at providing a specific benefit, therefore making your product superior to the competition, allowing you to steal customers and charge higher prices to take more profits. This strategy is known as product differentiation, and unlike cost leadership, it's about quality, not quantity. Look at Rolex, for example. They know lots of watch buyers want status, and so their watches are made with high quality craftsmanship, they focus on luxury branding, they produce limited supply, and they have a premium buying experience. As a result, each Rolex sells for around $10,000 and they're the most popular watch on the market because they're the best at giving watch buyers status. So when should you use the product differentiation strategy? Well, there's two important criteria. The first is that your customers care enough to pay higher prices for the specific benefit. This is generally tied to core human needs like health, relationships, or making more money. And the second criteria is that you need to protect your methods from being replicated, or else you'll end up selling the same product as the competition and people won't have a reason to buy from you or pay higher prices. We'll talk about some ways to defend against this in a few minutes. Now, while both cost leadership and product differentiation sound great, the issue is you can't chase both. You need to pick. This is because the tactics within these strategies conflict with each other. You wouldn't see Rolex use cheap plastic materials because that would reduce their status, and you wouldn't see IKEA make things out of gold because that would make things too expensive. So which one do you go for? Well, the customer is the one that determines success. So look at your customer purchasing criteria. If they mainly value cost, become a cost leader. But if they value a high quality feature, then become a differentiator. Whichever you pick, that's what will guide how you design your entire business. So now you have an idea of how you should compete. But there's one major question to answer before your strategy is complete, and that's which market should you even compete in? Because the market you pick is the biggest determinant of whether you even make a profit. A market may be declining, too saturated, or even be losing money. So how do elite companies pick markets that maximizes their profits? Well, our friend Mr. Porter developed another framework called Porter's 5 Forces, which explains that the monetary value of a market is divided up based on 5 forces. And by analyzing these forces, we can determine if a market is highly profitable or not. The first force to consider is the threat of new entrants coming in and taking your customers. Empirical evidence suggests this has the largest impact on profitability. And it's one of the reasons why something like dropshipping is so competitive, because it's really easy for anyone to start. And so the way around this is to go aggressive on marketing, so you sell huge volumes and benefit from economies of scale. This increases the amount of investment required for new companies to come in and compete on the same cost. Another method to prevent new entrants is to lock out your competition from distributors, just like how Coca-Cola has exclusivity agreements to make sure vendors only sell drinks from their portfolio. And another prevention is to increase your customers' switching costs to make it difficult for them to go to the competition. An example of this is using network effects, where the usefulness of your product increases as it gains more users. This is why everyone keeps using Facebook even though it might be average, because everyone else is already on the platform. The second force to consider is the amount of competition you have and whether their products are similar to yours. Studies also show this has a large impact on profitability. The best defense against this is to develop differentiated products that are hard to copy, like those that require specialized knowledge, are protected by patents, or where you have exclusive access to inputs. Just like how Apple acquired PrimeSense for their 3D sensor technology and has since developed patents for their Face ID systems. Next, we have the threat of substitutes. This is how easy it is for customers to use a different type of product. For example, instead of eating at a restaurant, anyone can cook at home or buy a snack from the grocery store. That's partly why many restaurants fail. The way around this is to build your brand for offering a great product, just like how everyone defaults to eating McDonald's. Or again, you can increase the cost of switching for your customers through things like reward programs or through something called data lock-in, where the more data a customer has with you, the more inconvenient it is for them to switch. Just like how some of us stick with our old high school emails out of convenience. The next force is your supplier's bargaining power to raise their prices or limit the amount of goods you receive. For example, if you're an airline, you're completely dependent on Boeing or Airbus to manufacture your planes, which means high costs and delays when they face issues. The way around this is to simplify and standardize the inputs into your business so that you can switch suppliers easily. Just like how Ford became the first car manufacturer to make affordable cars by standardizing its car parts to eliminate reliance on skilled craftsmen. Another method is through vertical integration, which is where you develop the capability to supply yourself. Just like how Apple moved away from Intel and started manufacturing its own processing chips to have more control over its product releases. The last force to consider is your customer's bargaining power to force you to lower prices or offer more value. For example, if you're a small food company, it's likely that big retailers will be able to negotiate you down. The way around this is to offer a differentiated product that's hard to get elsewhere. Or you can design your products to be integrated so they add more value when used together, just like how Apple's iCloud makes it easy to connect across their devices, rather than being on a bunch of isolated platforms. So now that you understand these forces, the way to use them is to set up a table and start gathering research from market reports to score the threat of these forces in different markets and geographies. This analysis gives you an overview of which markets are actually attractive, and you can pick based on which ones look the most favorable. And then based on the least favorable forces in that market, you can add the right tactics we discussed to counter them and capture even more profits. So now we have our fancy strategy, but none of that matters unless we know how to get people to buy from us. This is where the art of marketing comes in. But in a world where we hate sleazy salespeople and ads, how do elite companies like Apple have people lining up to buy from them? Well, studies reveal they make use of 4 factors that determine whether people want to buy something. The first consideration is that a person's desire for a product depends on where they're at. For example, this is world famous violinist Joshua Bell playing in the subway, and this is him playing at a concert hall. The key is that people won't want a brilliant product unless it's put in a place where they actually want to buy it. So the trick big companies use is to place their products in places where there's the highest urgency. This is why you see money exchanges at airports and why they sell car insurance at dealerships. The second marketing consideration is that people need around 7 touch points before building enough trust to buy from you. And so you need to get good at promoting your product. But to make sure people don't ignore your ads, you need to meet 3 requirements. First, you need to be promoting in places where people already have a demand for your product. Because despite what we may think, we can't actually make people want to buy our products. We can only reach people that are already looking for a solution. So if you were selling something like a baby book, it'd be a waste of time trying to reach mums that think they know it all. Instead, you want to target social media channels where new mums are actively seeking help. Secondly, you need to say the right words to get someone to buy. The biggest mistake people make is focusing on promoting product features when people only care about outcomes. So focus on outcomes like stopping their baby from crying rather than meaningless features like the number of tips in a book. And third, the message needs to be delivered by someone trustworthy. This is why ads with customer testimonials can have almost double the customer engagement. So that's promotion, which now brings us to our third marketing consideration, which is it doesn't matter how good your product is unless people think it's at the right price. But how do you know what's the right price? Well, there's 2 main ways to set prices, and it comes back to your strategy. If you're a cost leader, then your customers will likely prefer cost plus pricing, which means you determine how much it costs to make 1 unit and add a markup. And this markup is usually determined by your industry. However, if you've chosen a differentiated strategy, then you can go for value-based pricing, where you estimate the dollar value you create for your customer and capture as much of that as possible. For example, did you know a $2,800 bag from Dior costs around $57 to make? But people accept the pricing because the bag gives them status. Which brings us to our last and most important marketing consideration, which is that people will only line up to buy from you if your product is tailored to their needs and isn't a cash grab. Because if you build someone's dream product that solves all their problems, you can bet they'll be fighting to buy from you. So remember, you need to be like the iPod and not the iPod's competition. Together, these 4 factors are called the 4 Ps of marketing, and they determine how much you sell. But you want to know the real answer to all these questions? Well, you can't be in the right place, say the right things, have the right price, or have the right product unless you know exactly what the customer wants. This is why top companies like IKEA have developed platforms to understand their customers as much as possible. They know the deeper they understand their customer, the more they'll outperform the competition. But the good thing is we don't need fancy feedback platforms to benefit from knowing this. One of the highest return business moves every startup makes is to pick up the phone and ask 30 customers what their day-to-day looks like and what their dream solution is. This gives you all the insight you need to build a winning marketing strategy. So I'll leave a link for a customer interview guide in the description. So we've got our strategy and our marketing plan, but none of it matters unless we're making money. This brings us to the topic of of finance. And there's three main questions we want to answer if we want the finances of a high-performing company. The first is, how do we know if an opportunity is highly profitable or risky? Second, how do we manage our business to outperform the competition? And third, how do we make sure we're maximizing our growth? Firstly, let's talk about how to quickly assess the profitability of an opportunity. This is done through what's called cost volume profit analysis, which involves a simple but very insightful equation. So let's assume you're looking at starting a coffee shop. The equation starts with your profit, which equals the price of your product multiplied by the number of units sold, which is your revenue, minus your variable costs, which are the costs incurred every time you sell a product. So this would be the cost of the cups, the water, coffee beans, and electricity. And then we multiply that by the number of units sold. And then we minus your fixed costs, which are the costs incurred no matter how many units are sold. This would be things like your equipment, rent, staff, and insurances. So what's so interesting about this equation? Well, because fixed costs generally remain the same regardless of whether we sell anything, the key determinant of your profitability and risk are all the factors that are at risk at changing throughout the year. These sum up to what's called your total contribution margin, which is the amount of excess revenue that contributes to paying off your fixed costs and building your profits. To see this, let's say you sell coffees at $5 a cup, and the variable cost to make that cup is 50 cents. Your contribution margin per cup is then $4.50 per cup. Now, let's say your fixed cost is $90,000 for the year. So to break even and become profitable, you'd need to sell at least 20,000 coffees a year or 55 coffees a day. Now, using your data of how many coffees you can sell, you can judge how realistic it is to sell 55 coffees a day and break even, or whether you can even sell enough to reach your profit target. However, the most useful thing you can do with this equation is assess the likelihood of failure. This is done by considering the different worst case scenarios for your prices, variable cost, and number of sales throughout the year. For example, what would happen if the coffee shop next door lowered their prices to $4 and we had to do the same? What would happen if the price of coffee beans continues to go up? What would happen if a coffee shop opens nearby and we're not selling as many coffees? Would we stay profitable in these scenarios? And if not, do we want to take these risks on? So cost volume profit analysis tells you the key things you need to stay profitable. But now, profits alone aren't everything, because we've seen companies like the Lehman Brothers go from record high profits to collapsing a year later. So what do we actually need to focus on when managing a business? Well, there are actually four main financial metrics large companies manage to stay competitive. The first thing to manage is your company's short-term bankruptcy risk. To do that, you want to take a look at your company's balance sheet, which is one of the three financial statements that report a company's financial position. The balance sheet represents the net worth of the business. It records the value of what it owns in assets, what it owes in liabilities, and what's left over, which is your shareholders' equity or net worth. So to manage your short-term bankruptcy risk, you want to manage what's called your current ratio, which is calculated by taking the company's current assets, which is the assets that can be converted into cash within a year, divided by its current liabilities, which is the amount of money owed to lenders within the year. This measures how much you have in liquid assets in relation to what you immediately owe other people. So if your ratio is lower than 1, meaning you don't have enough current assets, then you're at risk of not paying your short-term debts, which can lead to lenders seizing your assets and forcing you into bankruptcy. On the flip side though, if this ratio is too high, then it's a sign of inefficiency, because it means you have a lot of excess cash or inventory, which is money that could be used elsewhere. This highlights the importance of managing what's called working capital. This is the amount of cash and inventory required to keep your business running. Think of it like keeping a certain amount of money in your bank accounts to cover ongoing expenses. You want just enough to cover any emergencies, but you don't want too much because that money could be invested elsewhere. So generally, you want a current ratio between 1.5 to 2. The second thing to manage is your company's long-term bankruptcy risk. This is managed through the debt to equity ratio, which from the balance sheet is the total liabilities divided by total shareholder equity. This represents how much of the company is being funded by debt compared to the amount funded by investors. Naturally, companies that are more reliant on debt have higher expenses and at a higher risk of bankruptcy. Not to mention, most lenders can impose penalties on you if your debt to equity ratio goes too high. But not all debt is bad. Most companies take on debt because it allows them to grow faster. So you want to take a balanced approach to debt and keep in line with debt to equity ratios that are normal for your industry. The third thing to manage is the size of your competitive advantage. To do this, you want to take a look at another financial statement called the income statement. The income statement reports all the revenues, costs, and profits made during the year. And what you want to monitor is your gross profit margin, which is the revenue minus the production costs divided by revenue. And because we know that competitive advantage comes from having relatively high prices to relatively low production costs, comparing your gross profit margin to your competitors indicates how strong your competitive advantage is and whether you need to make any improvements to your cost efficiency or product differentiation to stay competitive. But generating profits alone aren't good enough. They need to be generated efficiently. And so the last thing you want to manage is your asset turnover ratio, which is measured by taking the revenue from the income statement and dividing it by the average total assets from this year and last year's balance sheets. This tells you how many dollars of revenue your company generated per dollar of assets under its control throughout the year. We look at this because a company that controls a high amount of assets but isn't generating as much revenue means that its assets aren't being used efficiently. And such companies would slowly be losing market share to companies who are better at using their assets and therefore growing faster. So as a manager, it's important to make sure all the assets you're investing into are making you as much money as possible, which is what we'll discuss in the next few minutes. Overall, tracking these operational metrics is what's called ratio analysis, and it reveals the key managerial philosophies required to keep your business financially competitive. So make sure to track these ratios over time against your competitors to see whether there are any gaps to manage. However, keep in mind, these ratios will vary based on industry, so it's only useful to make comparisons against similar companies. So we know a big part of beating the competition is by being more efficient and generating more revenue per dollar of assets we control. This comes from knowing how to invest your money into projects that will maximize your returns, and there's 2 steps to doing this. Firstly, we can only maximize returns if we first know how to determine the value of all the opportunities we're considering, which, as a starting point, we'd probably think that the value of an opportunity would be to simply sum up all the future revenues and costs. But this doesn't actually work if we're trying to value a business or a project that will last multiple years. This is because there's a hidden opportunity cost of money we need to consider. See, for every dollar we have the option of investing it into the stock market, which is known to have a compounding return of 10% per year. What this means is every dollar you invest today can be worth at least $1.10 in a year and $1.21 the year after that, and so on. And so if you were to invest $1 into a business, then you'd want to make sure that business can make your dollar worth at least $1.10 in a year and at least $1.21 the year after that. Or else it'd just be easier not to invest in the business and just to invest in stocks. This is known as the time value of money. And all this means is when you want to consider the true value of a project or business, instead of forecasting its revenues and costs and simply summing them all up, you need to take into account the opportunity cost of that money. And this is done by dividing each year's cash flows by each year's rate of opportunity cost. This is known as discounting, and it gives you the true value of each year's cash flows after considering the opportunity cost of money. Then when you add the numbers up, you end up with what's called the net present value, which is the true value of that project. This process is called discounted cash flow modeling, and you can use it to value anything and make any investment decision. Because as long as the net present value is positive, you know that investment will probably make you money. Now that we can determine the value of our projects, the second step is to allocate our funds based on the efficiency of those projects, since we want to maximize the returns of our money. So how do we figure that out? Well, all we need to do is sum up the future discounted cash flows generated by each project and divide that by the initial cost for each project. This gives us our profitability index, aka the profit we make per dollar spent. This allows you to compare the efficiency of all the investments you're considering. And what you want to do is spend your budget on the projects from highest profitability index to the lowest, until you use up all your budget. This ensures you're using your money in the most competitive way possible. So far we've talked about all these fancy business strategies and tools, but there is one last issue. All of this is just a plan. The real work still needs to be done. So to truly get ahead, you need to carry out your plans faster than the competition. You need to continually grow your team's capabilities to be more capable than the competition, and you need a constant stream of new ideas on how to improve your business. But the big problem is, none of this can happen if your team is only doing the bare minimum, only showing up for the paycheck, and never improving their skills. It's only highly motivated people that work hard, push their capabilities, and come up with new ideas. This is why leadership and motivation is the last piece to creating an elite company, and why highly engaged companies are more profitable.
A company is simply a group of people. As a leader of people, you have to be a great listener, you have to be a great motivator.
But what makes a good leader, and how do you motivate people? Well, research shows anyone can make it into the top 15% of leaders, and it revolves around learning 4 key skills. See, research shows that humans need a long-term goal to work towards to become motivated. We hate showing up to work feeling like we're working towards nothing and that we're just there for the paycheck. That's why skill number 1 is how well you craft a long-term vision for your business. What do you want to achieve? What is your team working towards? What change in the world are you bringing for your customers? Because it's only when people see what they're working towards that they can become motivated. But here's the thing. We can't motivate people to work towards things they're not interested in. And so the only way to motivate them to work towards your vision depends on skill number 2, which is your ability to understand their personal goals and align those with your vision. Because it's only when they see their own personal gain that they'll be motivated. So figure out what they want, then lay out your plan to achieving your vision and show them how your future projects and roles can help them get there, whether it be a promotion, pay rise, or developing new skills. But we've all heard the talk that we're important to the company and we'll get all these growth opportunities, but yet we end up doing mind-numbing repetitive tasks. This is a huge issue because research shows that constant learning and growth is a key driver of motivation. That's why skill number 3 is your ability to actively empower people. Because people can't grow into new skills and responsibilities unless their manager creates those opportunities for them. So you need to take a genuine interest in their growth and create opportunities to challenge them. This could be as simple as asking them to do something a more senior team member would do. But there's one last thing a leader needs to enable all of this to happen, and that's a growth mindset. In my MBA, I met billion-dollar directors, founders of big startups, and C-suite executives. And whilst they're all impressive, I realized they're just normal people who've worked their butt off. But what stops most people from getting to that level is the belief they're limited by natural talent. Because if they believe they're naturally bad at certain things like public speaking or technical work, then they'll never try to be great at them and they'll never make it to the top. But the reality is, everything is a skill. And if they believe they can learn to do anything and that they're not limited by natural talent, then there's no skill they're not able to learn. Instilling the belief your team can learn to do anything is what will allow your team to grow and beat the competition. So the next time you hear someone say they're not good at doing something, tell them they're just not good at doing it yet. And this is why the last and most important thing I learned at business school is that whatever dream you have, whether you want to start your own business or become a CEO, is that there's no reason why you can't do it as well. You just need to learn the right things. Till then, you only live this life once. Make the most of it.